I woke up with my hands buried in cold soil and my knees pressed against damp ground. A gravestone stood inches from my face, and my name was carved into it with clean, sharp lines. My phone was in my pocket, and the date on the screen showed 5 years had passed. Dirt covered my clothes, as if I had been there for hours or days. I stood up and saw fresh flowers placed carefully at the base of the stone. My head was empty, and no memories answered back. I walked out of the cemetery without knowing how I arrived there. A woman passing by stared at me as if she recognized me. My house key fit a door I did not remember choosing. Inside the house, the air smelled lived in and familiar to someone else. Shoes by the door were small and brightly colored. A tiny jacket hung on a chair like someone had just taken it off. The walls held photos of a smiling child with my eyes. In one picture, I was holding her, and the date showed 3 years ago. A child's voice said "Mama" from the hallway. I followed the sound and found an empty room. A small bed was made neatly with cartoon sheets. I heard breathing and saw the shape of a child sleeping on my bed. When I turned on the light, the bed was empty. My phone showed dozens of reminders I had never set. Hospital appointments filled the calendar. A smell of disinfectant came from nowhere. I stood in the kitchen, holding a cup I did not remember buying. The cup slipped from my hand and shattered without me noticing how it happened. I cleaned the glass and found dried crayon marks under the table. A child's drawing showed me and her holding hands. My reflection in the mirror looked older than I felt. A headache arrived every time I touched the photos. I slept on the couch and woke to the sound of coughing nearby. The bedroom door was open when I checked. The bed sheets were disturbed, as if someone had moved. A small handprint appeared on the fogged bathroom mirror. I wiped it away, and it returned the next morning. I heard footsteps pacing at night, stopping beside my couch. Toys shifted locations without explanation. The television turned on by itself, playing a children's program. I found medicine bottles with my name and a child's name written beneath. The name felt familiar, but unreachable. I returned to the cemetery, driven by something I could not explain. The grave felt closer this time. The soil under my feet was disturbed again. A toy lay half buried near the stone. I picked it up, and my hands shook without instruction. The name on the grave matched the name on the medicine bottle. Images broke through in fragments when I touched the stone. A hospital room appeared with machines beeping steadily. A small body lay in a bed, surrounded by wires. I was sitting beside her, counting her breaths. Doctors spoke, but their words never stayed. I remembered carrying her down a hallway that never seemed to end. I remembered promises made quietly in the dark. At home, the child's voice grew louder at night. She stood at the foot of my bed once and said "Mama" clearly. The light was on, and nothing else in the room moved. She vanished when I reached out. I stopped sleeping and started leaving lights on. The calendar reminder triggered another image. I saw myself arguing with a doctor in a hallway. I saw my hands gripping paperwork. I remembered selling my car to pay for treatment. The house reacted as memories returned. Doors creaked open on their own. The child's room smelled freshly used. I found a recording on my phone labeled bedtime. My voice read a story while a child coughed softly. I dropped the phone and it kept playing. The sound followed me from room to room. I saw the child sitting on the stairs watching me. The stairs were empty when I looked again. I stopped eating without realizing it. Neighbors waved as if nothing was strange. One neighbor brought over a casserole and said I looked better. I did not know what better meant. She mentioned how strong I had been before. I returned to the grave again at night. The cemetery gate was open waiting. I knelt and the soil felt warm. A memory finally stayed. I was there the day she died. I remembered screaming and no sound coming out. I remembered going home alone with an empty car seat. I remembered standing over the grave and wishing not to wake up. I remembered choosing not to remember. The child's voice called Mama one last time behind me. I turned and saw only the stone. The flowers were new again. My name on the grave looked deeper than before. I understood the stone was not meant for me. It marked the place I left my mind. I stood and the headache stopped suddenly. The house was silent when I returned. The toys were gone. The photos showed only empty rooms. The child's room was cleared out completely. The calendar was blank. I sat alone until morning came. The neighbor knocked just after sunrise without waiting. She smiled carefully and stepped inside. She said she was glad to see me standing again. She said everyone had been worried after what happened. I asked her what she meant. She said after the funeral, I stopped speaking. She said I visited the grave every day for years. She said one morning, I was found unconscious beside it. She said the doctors called it a protective response. The words sounded distant and mechanical. She looked toward the empty child's room. She said I had tried everything to save her. She said I blamed myself for sleeping that night. Her words filled in the spaces memory avoided. She said I begged for more time. She said I refused to leave the hospital room. She said I screamed when they covered the bed. The house began making small sounds again. A toy rolled across the floor slowly. The neighbor froze and pretended not to see it. She asked how I was doing now. She asked if I was coping with my tragedy. The word tragedy landed heavier than the grave dirt. The child's voice said Mama behind her. The neighbor did not react. The voice said Mama again, closer this time. I saw the child sitting on the couch. The neighbor's smile tightened. She said adjustment takes time. The room felt smaller without changing shape. The child looked exactly like the photos. She swung her legs and watched me. The neighbor backed toward the door. She said she would check on me later. The door closed and the house went quiet. The child slid off the couch and stood beside me. She took my hand and it was warm. She said, Mama, you left me. The floor beneath us felt like soil. The walls smelled like disinfectant. The house lights flickered but stayed on. I knelt without choosing to. The child lay down as if tired. I covered her with a blanket that was not there before. She stopped moving, and the room returned to normal. The couch was empty. My hand was covered in dirt. The front door was open. I walked outside without shoes. The cemetery path felt familiar. I reached the grave and saw two names now. Mine was gone from the stone. Only hers remained. I understood the choice I made years ago. Forgetting was the only way I survived. Remembering was the punishment I accepted. The child's voice stopped calling. The grave was quiet and complete. I sat beside the stone until night came. No sounds followed me anymore. The house did not react when I returned. Everything stayed still and ordinary. The empty room remained empty. Sleep came without interruption for the first time. In the morning, the neighbor waved from across the street. She did not come over. The calendar stayed blank. The phone held no reminders. The grave no longer pulled me back. I visited it once more to be certain. The soil was settled and untouched. The toy was gone. I stood and said her name out loud. Nothing answered. The house accepted the silence. Days passed without events. The child never appeared again. The voice never returned. I kept the photos in a box. I did not destroy them. I understood forgetting had been temporary. Remembering had finished its work. I continued living in a house shaped by absence. People stopped checking on me. The neighbor stopped asking questions. The cemetery gate closed one evening and stayed that way. I stopped walking that direction. I stopped waking on the ground. My name existed only on documents again. The stone carried only truth now. I carried the rest. The nights stayed quiet. The bed remained empty. The room stayed clean. The memory no longer hunted. It stayed where it belonged. I understood the grave was never where she was. It was where I put the pain. I left it there and walked home.